Helix Harbor glimmered above Vraxis Prime like a flawless jewel, its lines too precise to be anything but deliberate. The Threx Dominion had built their station as a statement, order made visible, geometry as a warning. The human ship UTS Dauntless Horizon eased toward its docking vector. On the bridge, Commander Davor Vale watched the station grow on the display and told himself his heartbeat was steady. He had fought battles. He had negotiated ceasefires. None of that quite prepared him for representing a world whose greatest strategic asset in this context was not a weapon or an engine, but a song. Behind him, Amaya Kirov leaned against a bulkhead, arms folded, eyes fixed on the view. Her instrument case rested beside her boots. She felt like she had smuggled a live animal into a strict museum. They look like the kind of people who outlaw improvisation, she murmured. Dr. Samira Galib stood nearby, tablet in hand, observing Amaya's micro-twitches. They don't outlaw it, she said. They condition it away. Miguel Araneta muttered that the station's docking protocols had more checksums than most warships. Hao Belly watched security readouts, tracing likely ambush lines even though this was, on paper, a diplomatic mission. Tomas Trenholm, the delegation's diplomat, stepped onto the bridge with a breath of filtered station air. Docking permission granted, he reported. Their welcome message stresses clear boundaries and emotional hygiene. Amaya made a face. That's an actual phrase? It is now, Tomas said. The reception hall of Helix Harbor smelled of antiseptic and polished stone. Banners bearing the Dominion's sigil, a ring of interlocking shards, hung at perfect intervals. Every surface reflected some version of the same story: unity, precision, control. Prefect Relthar Xith waited on a raised dais, flanked by functionaries and by Warden Lorum, the station's security chief. Relthar's pale green eyes assessed the approaching humans as one might study an unexpected chemical compound. Commander Vale of Earth, Relthar said. Welcome. The Dominion acknowledges your world's late arrival on the galactic stage. Davor inclined his head. We're honored to be received. Introductions followed. When Tomas named Amaya as their cultural director and composer, Relthar's gaze settled on her instrument case. We have reviewed the proposal for your performance, he said. Our society relies on emotional stability. Excessive affect is disruptive. Your display will be monitored. If it exceeds acceptable parameters, our systems will cut the feed. Our intent is not to cause harm, Samira said. Our work has been tailored to respect your population's conditioning. Relthar nodded once. See that it does. Lorum said nothing, but his eyes lingered on Yelena Druzhin's camera, then on Miguel's datapad, and finally on Amaya's calloused fingers. He had studied humanity's file, a species that willingly subjected itself to simulated fear and grief for recreation, then emerged laughing. To him, it felt like sharing a room with a kind of madness. Davor read the tension in the hall as easily as he read the station's structural seams. The Dominion had agreed to this summit to manage a new variable, not to welcome an equal partner. They were prepared to be impressed by human technology. They were not prepared to be changed. The summit assembly hall could have fit a small town inside. Delegations filled tiered seating. The Threx majority sat closest to the central stage. The Selari Confluence delegation occupied a cool blue wedge off to one side, their envoy, Talith Jaru, watching with iridescent, shifting eyes. Human music systems and holographic projectors had been grudgingly integrated into the hall's infrastructure. Amaya stood backstage with one hand on her instrument interface, the other in a white-knuckled fist. You can still walk away, Davor said quietly. If I walk away, they'll think we brought charts, she replied. She drew a breath, forced her shoulders to loosen. They invited us to show what we bring. This is it. Samira monitored performance parameters one more time. They had modeled the Threx nervous system, tested motifs with volunteer subjects. The design goal was simple and nearly impossible: evoke deep feeling without tipping conditioned minds into collapse. A station voice announced the start of the human demonstration. Amaya stepped into the lights. Thank you for this opportunity, she said. We offer a piece about waking up. Not against anyone, just toward ourselves. The hall quieted with the absolute hush of practiced obedience. On distant worlds, screens flicked to the feed. Threx citizens gathered because they had been told to. Amaya began with a single, uncertain melody line. It wandered, stumbled, found its balance, a pattern unfamiliar to ears trained on rigid structures. The visuals showed a horizon line brightening by degrees, not all at once, as if light were a decision. At first, the Threx audience reacted with mild confusion. The piece did not announce its message. It did not glorify the Dominion. It did not resolve quickly. It lingered in questions. Talith's eyes filled with moisture. They had sat through countless state performances, all impeccable and numb. This, by contrast, seemed to care more about what they felt than what they thought they ought to feel. In a side section, a young Threx technician from Kir Aitken named Kelri sat with her work cohort listening. She had always carried a restless itch beneath her conditioning, a tendency to sketch unauthorized patterns in the margins of maintenance logs. She had learned to hide it. Now the music found that itch and refused to let go. As the piece progressed, Amaya layered in translated human voices, an elder remembering the day we realized the cage was mostly in our heads, a child laughing at nothing in particular, a chorus of people saying, "We chose each other." Neural monitors spiked. Loruum, watching from the oversight box, tensed. "Prefect," he said, "their performance is driving unauthorized effect levels." Relthar's gaze remained on the hall. He saw a Selari diplomat openly weep. He saw Threx guards who had never fidgeted suddenly shift their weight, staring at their own hands as if noticing them for the first time. "Let it run," Relthar said. "For now." The piece crested on a chord that did not quite resolve. It ended with the sense that something had begun, not finished. Silence. Then uneven applause, heavier from non-Threx delegations. In the Threx sections, a few hands came together tentatively. Others remained still, as if to move would acknowledge too much. Kelri sat frozen, chest tight, the final notes echoing inside her. For the first time in her life, she felt that a public event had spoken directly to the small, unruly part of her she had always tried to smother. She was exhilarated. She was terrified. The judgment came the next day. The directive arrived on the dauntless horizon under multiple security seals. Davor read it once in silence, then again aloud to his gathered team. In light of the destabilizing psychological impact of unsanctioned human cultural emissions, he read, the Prefectural Council declares all human-origin artistic content within Dominion space to be memetic ordnance. Its possession, distribution, and performance shall fall under military regulation. Amaya stared. They are classifying our art as a weapon. In their frame it is, Yusuf Hanaga said. It changes how people think without their permission. That's more frightening to them than any ship. Miguel scanned the attached protocols. They want to impound our instruments and archives while we're in their territory. Total inventory. Samira rubbed her forehead. They're not wrong that this can harm if used recklessly. It doesn't justify locking an entire population inside emotional concrete. Amaya bristled. I wanted them to feel alive, not to give these people new excuses for clampdowns. They're reacting because your performance showed them a vulnerability, Davor said. That also means it showed us leverage. The question is how, or if, we use it. Hao suggested quietly that they needed to see how the population was responding, not just the leadership. Davor agreed. Miguel and Hao left the ship under cover of routine inspections. They walked Helix Harbor's maintenance levels, where order thinned. There they nearly collided with Kelri, who had been replaying fragments of Amaya's melody in her head until she half expected it to seep out of her pores. She tried to step aside. Miguel smiled in apology and asked whether she had watched the performance. I was on duty, she said. It played in our bay. What did you think? He asked. Her training told her to give the safe answer. It was dangerous, she said. Such unbounded emotion leads to imbalance. That is why it has been restricted. What did you feel? Miguel asked. She should have walked away. Instead, the truth slipped out like something that had waited too long. I felt seen, she whispered. For a few stolen moments in a quiet cross corridor, she allowed herself to describe the experience. The sense of hearing an inner note echoed, the realization that her secret doubts did not make her uniquely broken. Miguel and Hao listened without commentary, just enough warmth for her to realize there were entire species where such conversations were not subversive. When they suggested that there were others like her and places they shared such feelings more openly, Kelri's pulse hammered. She left them with a mix of fear and a glimmering desire she could not quite name. Hours later, in the grid maintenance bay, She stared at her console and the quiet void of the Vale grid's diagnostic channels. The Dominion's broadcast network was everywhere. It carried orders and stories into every home, every dormitory. It also, out of necessity, carried unglamorous traffic, error reports, system checks. Those channels were less tightly monitored. Kelri had heard rumors of something called Signal Ember, a ghost channel piggybacking on diagnostics, passing banned texts and clumsy slogans between dissidents. She had ignored it as self-destructive. Now she keyed in the handshake sequence with shaking fingers. The Ember interface flickered into view, jittering just enough to slip under logs. Node detected, Helix Harbor, identify. She hesitated, then very softly. Kelri, Grid Tech, I heard the human song. Do you have more? After a pause, Ember Core here, human content dangerous, also promising. You sure? She thought of her arrested colleague, of the ache left by Amaya's peace. Yes. On the dauntless horizon, Miguel and Anika Chakri were studying anomalies in the Vale grid. They saw Signal Ember's signature almost at the same time Kelri saw theirs. A narrow band whisper from their ship slipped into the Ember stream. Node, dauntless horizon, human vessel, intent, share, not command, seeking contact. The Ember network's caretakers debated. The Dominion had just declared human art a weapon. Letting those same humans into their underground looked like inviting a supernova into a coal mine. In the end, curiosity and desperation won. They asked for proof of non-hostility. The humans sent a small song about rebuilding after storms, deliberately modest, with annotations outlining its intended emotional curve. Kelri listened in a maintenance alcove, biting her knuckles to keep from making sounds. The tune was simple, but the quiet determination it carried sank into her like rain into cracked earth. More, she typed. Over the following days, a cautious exchange took shape. The humans did not dump their archives. Guided by Samira and Yusuf, they curated works that presented alternatives to obedience without inciting blind rage. Poems about neighbors choosing each other over distant rulers, small dramas where disagreements ended in compromise rather than punishment. Kelri became a conduit and collaborator. She explained Threx symbols, conditioning patterns, and subtle aversions. Amaya adjusted her pieces accordingly. A holographic work that gently reconfigured the Dominion sigil into other shapes appeared in Ember streams. On several worlds, viewers watched, mesmerized as the once sacred icon rearranged itself without shattering. It suggested that systems were made of parts, and parts could be used differently. People began humming forbidden motifs in factories. They met after shifts to pass around glitchy copies of human works and new Threx creations inspired by them. The Dominion saw the surface effects, small declines in productivity, unusual gathering patterns, shifts in requested entertainment. They did not at first see the network underneath. When they finally caught a technician with Ember content, a friend of Kelri's, and dragged him away for recalibration, the underground movement hardened. Show us how you faced this on Earth, Ember asked. Yelena, Samira, and Yusuf argued their way through that request. In the end, they sent a carefully edited sequence, images of protests met with batons, of people forming protective lines, of the same streets later filled with different banners. The piece did not glamorize pain, but it did not hide it. Kelri watched in a storage closet, hands shaking. It hurt. It also planted an idea she had never dared articulate. Authority might not be inevitable. In the Selari confluence, Talith received reports of Ember's growth in the Dominion's twitching response. The Selari had long resented the Dominion's domination of trade lanes, but open war would be catastrophic. This, however, this slow viral reawakening through culture, intrigued them. They contacted Davor discreetly. "We will help you amplify your art," Talith said, "under one condition. When the Dominion's grip loosens, you will not replace it with your own. You will step away." Davor held their gaze. That promise would cost humanity potential power. It would also define them. "Agreed," he said. "We are not here to trade chains." The Dominion had its own weapon, the Glass Chorus Protocol. In a secured chamber on Vraxis Prime, Lorum reviewed its parameters. With a single command, the Chorus would override all civilian feeds with an intense audio-visual barrage engineered to drown deviant patterns under synchronized cues. Crude but effective, it could reset a population's emotional baseline at the cost of temporary cognitive strain. It had never been used at full scale. Its existence had always been a quiet insurance policy. Loroum now considered it a lifeline. Prefect Relthar hesitated. Ordering the chorus meant admitting that normal control had failed. It meant forcing minds already rattled by human art through another unnatural storm. "Use it only if absolutely necessary," he told Loroum. "We are not butchers." Loroum thought butchered minds preferable to disobedient ones, but he bit back the thought. Founding Day arrived. Every year the Dominion marked its birth with empire-wide spectacle. This year, Relthar intended the broadcast as a reaffirmation. The Vale grid hummed at full capacity as banners fluttered across worlds, as rehearsed speeches queued in their buffers. In a hidden bay on Helix Harbor, Amaya sat before her instrument. Miguel, Anika, and Hao surrounded her with projection rigs and improvised signal injectors. Kelri hovered at a grid terminal, sweat beading along her hairline. Talith's face flickered on a small hollow, Selari relays poised at the edges of Dominion space. They had named the piece they meant to slip into the broadcast the Silent Orbit. Its narrative, a being living in enforced routine hearing, faintly at first, an interior voice, discovering others who hear theirs, turning together toward something beyond the central command. Its engineering, multi-species audio spectra, visuals built from abstract forms recognizable yet not overtly treasonous, no subliminals, no hard-coded calls to action. Its risk, immeasurable. At 12 p.m. station time, Prefect Relthar appeared on screens across the Dominion, framed by flags and honor guards. "Citizens of the Dominion," he began, "on this day, we celebrate." Kelri executed the injection. The primary feed hiccuped. Miguel's code slid into the gap and latched onto the main channel. Selari relays locked on and boosted. Relthar's image vanished. For a heartbeat, static reigned. Then every screen in the Dominion showed the same thing. A single figure in a gray field, standing as straight and lifeless as any citizen in an enforced assembly. Silence. Then a faint pulse of light at the figure's chest. Amaya began to play. The first notes of the silent orbit seemed barely there. They were as much absence as sound. Still, people leaned in. In factory break rooms, in barracks, in crowded plazas, attention shifted from boredom to a prickle of curiosity. The lone figure cocked its head, as if listening to something only it could hear. The light in its chest pulsed in time with the modest melody. Slowly, awkwardly, it took a step. In the control nexus, Loroum cursed. "Engage glass chorus," he snapped. "Override all civilian channels." Technicians tried. The chorus armed, but when they attempted to route it, their commands slid into Miguel's elegantly constructed sync, cycling back without effect. To shut down the Hijack channel entirely would risk core systems. "Primary override non-responsive," a tech stammered. "We can cut auxiliaries, but not central." "Then cut auxiliaries," Loroum snarled. "Kill everything that isn't life-critical." Secondary feeds died. Game channels, news tickers, entertainment loops. The only thing left on most screens was the unauthorized broadcast. On those screens, the lone figure wandered a landscape of repeating shapes. Each step it took left a faintly glowing footprint. Voices began to murmur in the background, neutral, unthreatening sentences that could be any citizen's thoughts. "I work, I rest, I recite the creed. Sometimes I think about walking past my assignment station and not stopping. They told us we chose this. I don't remember choosing." The music swelled, not into a battle hymn, but into a many-layered invitation. On Kir Aitken, workers paused mid-shift, fingers loosening on tools. On Vraxis Prime, citizens bunched into the plaza looked from the screen to each other. Soldiers on a garrison moon gripped their weapons tighter, then eased them unconsciously. The lone figure encountered another, frozen like a statue. It reached out, touched the other's shoulder. The second figure's chest light flickered, then brightened. Together they took a step, leaving two sets of luminous footprints. Across the Dominion, people began to reach out, a hand on a neighbor's arm, a hesitant grip on a fellow worker's sleeve. Not coordinated, not scripted, but uncannily in sync. Relthar, watching helplessly as his own Founding Day speech dissolved into this alien narrative, felt something crack inside. He had believed the Dominion provided safety, meaning. Now his people were turning, not toward a human flag, but toward each other. The composition entered its planned ascent. Originally, Amaya had crafted a final movement that drove toward a cathartic peak, symbols of authority crumbling, crowds surging. In the broadcast, the central icon, an abstracted stand-in for any focal power, began to flicker. Figures broke formation, moving outward. Emotion signals spiked across Ember's network. Samira read the data streaming into her console and blanched. "We're seeing rage and elation peaking together," she said. "Crowds are starting to push against cordons. If we feed that with a triumphal ending..." Her projections showed riots, stampedes, panicked crackdowns. Davor saw them too. "Amaya," he said, voice low and urgent, "change it, now." "In front of all of them?" she whispered. Changing a piece mid-performance at this scale was almost sacrilege to the craft, but then nothing about this moment was ordinary. "We came to give them a choice," Davor said, "not to choose blood for them." Amaya closed her eyes, feeling the vast, strained cord of countless minds on the edge of decision. She shifted her hands. Instead of driving the rhythm harder, she let it spread. The high line softened into something steadier. The percussion undercurrent settled into a pulse like walking side by side. On the screens, the central icon did not explode. It dimmed. Figures turned away from it, forming small circles of their own. They began to talk in animated pantomime, heads tilted toward each other instead of the center. On Kir Aitken, a woman who had started running toward the Overseer's tower stopped short. She looked back at her fellow workers. "They need us to keep the lines moving," she said. Her voice shook, but she kept going. "What if we just don't?" "Don't?" someone echoed blankly. "Stop," she said. "Right here. Sit." It was a notion so alien to Dominion-trained reflexes that they laughed at it first, but as if responding to the new rhythm in the music, one worker after another set down their tools and sank to the factory floor. Overseers shouted. A guard raised his baton. His arm wavered. In the plaza on Vraxis Prime, instead of charging security barricades, people clustered into impromptu circles. They argued, voices rising, but stayed where they were. A guard captain watched, orders sitting heavy in his throat. Firing into a seething mob was one thing. Firing into groups just talking was another. "If we open fire now," his second-in-command said quietly, "they will never believe the creed again." On a rural world, a local administrator tried to convene an emergency loyalty assembly. Only half the expected crowd appeared. Those who came listened with expressionless faces, minds elsewhere. In the control nexus, Loruam realized with dawning horror that the danger had shifted out of the domain his tools could reach. The threat was no longer just eruptive violence, it was withdrawn consent. "Pull the chorus feed from the core entirely," he hissed. "We'll rebuild from scratch if we must." Engineers obeyed, suppressing what they could. The last strains of the silent orbit faded from some worlds mid-phrase. On others, the piece completed with a final gentle image, circles of beings sitting together, central icons dimmed in the background, horizons brightening. In the bay, Amaya's hands fell away from the interface. She sagged back, chest heaving. "We cut out the fireworks," Miguel said, almost accusingly, still shaking with adrenaline. "We also might have cut the body count," Samira said. Her eyes were on Ember feeds, reports of sit-downs, of councils forming, of isolated clashes but not yet full conflagration. Davor stood very still, listening with his senses stretched beyond the hull to the faint rumble of 1,000, 1,000,000 conversations beginning. The Dominion did not fall in a day. It fractured. On Kir Aitken, the sit-down spread from factory to factory. Attempts to haul workers to recalibration centers stumbled when transport crews refused to operate. Some guards carried out orders with zeal, others looked at the seated masses and quietly set down their weapons. On Vraxis Prime, citizen circles in the plaza became nightly gatherings. They talked about work quotas, about surveillance, about the newly remembered possibility that rules could be questioned. Prefect Relthar faced his council. Loruam demanded a crackdown, targeted strikes, mass detentions, full deployment of the glass chorus once repairs were complete. "They are infected," Loruam said. "We must cauterize." Relthar looked at faces around the table, including those of administrators whose own families had sat in those circles. He thought of his youth, of lessons about chaos and balance, about the necessity of firm guidance. He thought of the human peace that had shown him his people seeing each other, not just the state. "I will not order indiscriminate slaughter of citizens for listening to a song," he said finally. "Nor will I give you a carte blanche to erase every deviation in the name of cleanliness. If some worlds insist on walking away, we will not glass them into compliance. Loruum's eyes burned. Then you doom the Dominion. Perhaps the Dominion, as we defined it, has already doomed itself, Relthar said quietly. In that moment, he chose restraint over absolute power. It would cost him his position. It would also prevent the worst possible spiral. Word of his refusal filtered in half-true fragments through Ember and official leaks. It complicated the emerging stories. Some cast him as coward, some as cautious savior. The truth, as always, fell between. On Helix Harbor, security teams stormed toward the human section. Hao met them with a containment line, non-lethal weapons only. The clash was brief and disorienting for both sides. Humans fought unpredictably, not aiming to kill but to stall. Threx formations faltered as conflicting orders came in from a command network suddenly less coherent than it had ever been. Davor stood where the cameras could see him, hands visible, calling for a stop. "You have larger issues than us," he said over station channels. "We will not be your hostages. We will also not be your rulers." The guards' discipline wavered. Some remembered the broadcast, the circles, the sense of something unscripted yet not entirely terrifying. Kelri stepped into the open, hands raised. "We did this together," she said, voice shaking. "Not the humans alone, us choosing to listen. If you drag them away, you drag us too." Her supervisor, pale with stress, hesitated. Warden Loruum was no longer answering promptly. The chain of command frayed. One guard lowered his weapon, another followed. The assault dissolved into an uneasy truce in that corridor, a visual of humans and Threx facing each other, no one firing. Yelena captured it all, not staged, not triumphant, just tired beings choosing, for that moment, not to escalate. Across the Dominion, similar scenes played out. In some, restraint failed, shots were fired, people died. In others, something unprecedented happened. Orders to open fire met with quiet refusal. Weeks passed. What had been a monolith became a patchwork. Some worlds clung to the old creed, using whatever remained of the glass chorus and strict discipline to restore a colder version of stability. Others formed provisional councils, declaring autonomy in carefully worded statements. They pledged not to summarily persecute former officials, understanding how easily new tyrannies grew from old wounds. The Selari confluence stepped in as mediator where they could. Talith moved from world to world, helping sketch new compacts, invoking the example of the human intervention as both warning and inspiration. The dauntless horizon remained nearby, its presence both comforting and worrying to different factions. Davor made good on his promise. When approached by a coalition on Vraxis Prime offering him advisory authority in their transitional council, he declined outright. "Your future is yours," he said, on a broadcast carried through channels that only months ago had been used to enforce doctrine. "We gave you back the ability to ask different questions. We won't answer them for you." Some humans back on Earth called him a fool for refusing influence. Others called him the first man in memory to turn away from Empire when it lay in reach. Amaya returned to Earth sooner than most, burned out and unsure. News reached her in waves. A Kier Council passing protections for unsanctioned expressive acts. A frontier world descending into brief, nasty factional fighting before a group of workers broadcast their own version of the silent orbit, slowed down and grounded in local images to calm things. She watched a low-resolution video of Threx children banging rhythms on discarded equipment, laughing when they went off-beat, and felt some of the weight lift from her chest. Kelri found herself on a small committee in charge of cultural archives in a newly semi-autonomous Vraxis district. She argued that Ember logs, human pieces included, belonged in public repositories, not locked away. "It started as contraband," an older colleague objected. "It started as contraband because we were not trusted with ourselves," Kelri replied. "If we mean to be something else, we can't build our new world on the same fear." In a modest building formerly used to store propaganda sets, archivist Nemu Sel oversaw the creation of a shared media library. On its walls, early visitors could see a Dominion-era ritual dance, a Selari oral epic, and in a central alcove, the Silent Orbit, annotated in 3 languages. Groups came not to be instructed, but to argue. Was the human piece manipulative or liberating? Did it cross a line by using art to push people toward behavioral change, even if that change was self-determination? Yusuf, visiting once, smiled faintly as he listened. That they could have this argument at all was to him the point. One day, a young Threx approached Yelena in a reclaimed plaza. "Is it true you have many more stories like the song that changed everything?" the youngster asked. Yelena considered the cracked banners overhead, now painted over with rough new symbols. "We do," she said, "but the ones that will matter most here are the ones you make next." The youngster looked back at a group of friends experimenting with new instruments and nodded, half understanding, half impatient to get back. On a small moon that had quietly declared independence, a clutch of teenagers gathered in a storage bay with a stolen projector. "Let's watch that old human piece," one suggested, "the one that made our parents weird." "Nah," another said. "We've seen it. Let's put on what Jaren's been working on." They dimmed the lights and started a raw, clumsy animation about a factory that turned out flowers instead of parts, set to a looping melody that owed something to human harmonies, but bent them in odd, lovely directions. The projector flickered. Their laughter filled the room when a line went crooked. No one corrected them with doctrine. Far away, aboard the dauntless horizon, Davor looked out at another starfield on another voyage and thought of that first performance on Helix Harbor. He knew their intervention would be debated for generations. Some would say they had no right. Others would say they had a duty. He himself knew only this. Presented with a choice between letting a population remain inside an engineered numbness forever or jarring them into awareness with a risk of pain, he had chosen the latter, and then chosen, at the critical instant, not to push them over the edge into fire. Humanity moved on through the stars not as conquerors draped in banners, but as a species increasingly known for something more subtle and unsettling. The knack for walking into rigid systems and showing sentient beings a mirror of themselves, slightly tilted so they could see a path they had never been permitted to imagine. In worlds once saturated with single, unchanging songs of loyalty, there was now a growing clamor of off-key, half-finished melodies. They clashed, they harmonized, they changed over time. No one fully controlled them. That, in the end, was the dangerous, exhilarating thing humans had brought, not a single victorious anthem, but the insistence that the chorus belonged to everyone who could still feel the urge to sing.